All right, again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's grant solicitation, the OJJDP FY 2020 Alaska Children's Advocacy Center Expansion Initiative for Child Abuse Victims Grant Solicitation. My name is William Moore, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded. This event is being recorded and will be published on INTAC's YouTube page after the event. For those wishing to download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Just simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing in a group, go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. And I'll give folks just a couple of seconds to do so. Again, if you are viewing in the group and there are additional people in the room with you today, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Again, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. I will now turn it over to Kristen Crackey for today's webinar. Kristen, take it away.
Thank you, William. Thank you all for joining today, and most especially for your interest in this new solicitation that OJJDP is releasing this year as part of our competitive funding, and that is OJJDP Fiscal Year 2020 Alaska Children's Advocacy Center Expansion Initiative. We're very excited to offer this this year. So we're going to cover over the course of this webinar a general overview of the program, overview of the goals and objectives, and cover a few of the basic application requirements for those who may be less familiar with the application process for our agency. I mentioned this solicitation is Alaska Children's Advocacy Center Expansion and can be found at this URL. These hyperlinks are active, so if you'd like to click on any of these as we go, feel free. The application due date is just before midnight on March 25th, 2020. So as the broad overview of this project, this is a 5-year grant program. OJJDP will be making awards as cooperative agreements, which may be different from your experience in funding as a grant. There is a distinction between a grant and a cooperative agreement. What that means is that you'll be entering into a partnership with OJJDP where we will, as a partnership, collaborate on the implementation of this project expansion. So OJJDP plays a more active role in the implementation of the program than would be typical in a standard grant. So we just want to raise that to your attention that these would be cooperative agreements. The overall goal of the program is to increase the coverage and capacity of child advocacy services in Alaska for victims of child abuse and, of course, their families. The objective and deliverables for this initiative fall into 2 categories. The first category is new satellite child advocacy centers. And for those who are less familiar with child advocacy centers, satellite is a specific designation provided by the National Children's Alliance, which is the national membership and accreditation organization for child advocacy centers. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second category is capacity enhancements for existing child advocacy centers. So eligibility for either of these two categories is the same in the sense that eligible applicants must be Alaska-based child advocacy centers. For Category 1, for new satellites, the applicant must be a fully accredited member of the National Children's Alliance, which is that organization I just mentioned is in charge of membership and accreditation standards. So Category 2 for the capacity enhancements is funding that is eligible to Alaska-based child advocacy centers that are accredited or affiliated members of the National Children's Alliance. And those non-member CACs working with the National Children's Alliance to become members, sometimes also referred to as supporting members. The critical information here is that for Category 2, everybody who will be awarded under this category will need to be Alaska-based child advocacy center working directly with a member of the National Children's Alliance at whatever standing the National Children's Alliance has allocated to your organization. So a little bit more about eligibility. There are a couple of resources available. The hyperlink is to a map to the National Children's Alliance that shows all of the existing CACs identified for the state of Alaska. I understand that there are some who are working toward higher levels of accreditation and membership with the National Children's Alliance. So basically the folks that are on that map are the eligible applicants, keeping in mind that for Category 1, you must be a fully accredited child advocacy center. And then just to reiterate what I said about Category 2, if you do not see yourself on the map but are working actively in good standing or actively working with membership of the National Children's Alliance, whatever designation the National Children's Alliance has allotted to you, as long as you're working with them, you are eligible to compete. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'll go back. That second hyperlink is the National Children's Alliance membership types. So you can review those and see where you fit, but you need to be working with them and designated by them in some capacity. And that would, I will just add a footnote that will be really important in your application to demonstrate and show that designation and that membership, that active membership that you have to be eligible. All right, so for Category 1, new satellite CACs, we are looking to expand coverage, and again, through an existing fully accredited CAC in Alaska. Satellite CACs, as I indicated, was a specific designation on the NCA's website, and it's discussed on that membership link on the slide before. But satellite CACs are child-friendly facility offering on-site forensic interviews and victim advocacy services under the sponsorship and oversight of a National Children's Alliance accredited CAC. So what that means is in order to implement, and for Category 1, if you're implementing a new satellite CAC, you would be working with a fully accredited CAC who will assist you in oversight and sponsorship to ensure that you're doing the forensic interviewing and the victim advocacy services in a way that's consistent with the National Children's Alliance standards. So that fully accredited CAC is the lead applicant and the key partner in looking to bring satellite services to a new area in Alaska. Funding will support the activities necessary to develop and implement the Satellite CAC, and accredited CACs applying must include information detailing your coordination with Alaska Native corporations and Alaska Native villages in general, maximizing support for the proposed satellite. So OJJDP is looking for applicants to come in as in partnership with each other to support Alaska Native villages and to expand the reach of CAC services throughout the state, in particularly underserved and harder to reach areas of Alaska. Okay, so again, for Category 1, new satellite CACs, the maximum number of awards that OJJDP expects to make is 4. It says up to 4 because there will be flexibility across these dollar amounts. So it's up to 4, and we anticipate awarding a total of $3 million in this category, although, again, flexible. For each individual award, the maximum dollar amount that will be awarded is $750,000 per applicant or awardee, and that will be over a 60-month or 5-year period of time. We anticipate the startup date being July 1, so that would be the date you would want to indicate on your application form, and is non-standard. Typically, OJJDP applications say October 1, but we're anticipating a July start date because we want it to advance the work of this project as quickly as possible and get that support started across the state for that 5-year period of time. And again, I'm noting that it is a cooperative agreement. Okay, so shifting to Category 2 and an overview of Category 2 relating to capacity enhancements for existing CACs. This category supports programmatic enhancement of existing child advocacy centers, noting again my reference to that map that is a hyperlink on an earlier slide. The goals of this expansion and this capacity expansion is to increase the range and the quality of services and/or address specific Alaska infrastructure needs that we have heard through our planning and development of this project through focus groups across the state and working with partners in the Child Advocacy Center field based in Alaska. Examples of the types of things that would be incorporated in capacity enhancement can really have a very broad range. So these are on the slide. I've listed a few examples, but these are by no means the full scope. It's really based on the CAC's expressed need, and I'll talk a little bit later in the application about documenting that need. But examples could include expanding the types of mental health services, bringing in evidence-based mental health service into the program. So, for example, serving with an evidence-based practice model an earlier age range than you have been able to provide to date, or increasing forensic staff, specialized equipment, transportation, interview room enhancements, or any other creative or innovative solution that you have to service delivery and service quality or capacity issues that you identify in reaching the child victims in your service area. So we were really creating a lot of breadth here for you to be able to base your enhancements on your needs. So we really want you to tell us your needs. I'll also talk about some flexibility related to the timelines here, I think on the next slide. Yes. So again, the maximum number of awards that will be flexible, but we anticipate up to 13 for a total allocation of funding of $7.8 million. However, and again, it's up to 60 months or 5 years. So if you want to propose implementing a a new service delivery model, that's going to take some time, and you may want to use the full 60 months to successfully and effectively implement a new delivery model. However, I mentioned flexibility in timeline and in scope to meet your expressed needs. If you were doing some infrastructure enhancements, bringing in new technology for forensic interviewing that you didn't have, or other types of equipment needs that may be one time or may incorporate short-term expenditures, you may not need the entire 60 months. We ask you to be flexible and to submit an application only for what you need, and to clearly and specifically document and explain your case for that need as a part of your proposal. So you would do that both in the project description as well as in the timeline and the budget. And the program activities and scope that you outline should align very clearly with the timeline that you outline, which should align very clearly with the budget. So all three of those things should support each other. Okay, so we will talk now a little bit about the application as I was starting to transition to that. I will call your attention to pages 8 through 10 of the solicitation. That's where the content and guidance around the application elements are provided. There's a lot of detail. Please read it carefully. But the key things to note is to describe the problem that this funding or project will solve. So that's part of that expressed need, and being very clear about what that need is, and doing so with data and information that you have about the service area and the service population. And also where you make the case for creative and innovative solutions, because only you, as the applicant, only you know the needs of that area and the best way to solve those challenges. The second piece is to detail how the project will operate throughout the project period, describe the specific strategies to be used to address the goals and objectives. And here, the guidance that we like to give folks is to be very detailed in those project activities. So think in terms of describing the frequency, the intensity, the duration of the activity, and who's being served. So just to illustrate, frequency would be meeting once a week, intensity would be for 1 hour, and the duration would be for 6 months, and then targeting who would be served. Every activity, every strategy proposed in the application should have that level of detail. Okay, so successful applicants will provide a clear description of the service area and the need. And so service area will be both geographic and population-based. So, you know, who the child victims and their families are, what their age range is, and then the geographic area. Also, successful applicants will detail a clear understanding of the child and family population in your community and the impact of violence and abuse on the families, so that when you're describing your project design, it's clear that you understand and that the proposed solutions are based on that knowledge and information that you're detailing to us. And then of particular attention, which I mentioned at the beginning, but I will call out here as well in terms of the actual application criteria and selection process, is that we will be looking for the detailed coordination with Alaska Native corporations and villages to maximize that support for the CAC development, and to identify and demonstrate key partnerships across all the necessary partners. And that includes the submission of tribal authorizing resolutions or MOUs or whatever contractual agreements are appropriate for the partnership. But if you were submitting as co-applicants, those are necessary. So the next couple of slides are just detailing out some standard application information that we have for all solicitations. This is not specific to Alaska Child Advocacy Center expansion, but we will lift this up to you to have you explore these priority areas as a way to enhance your competitive application. So if this applies to you in terms of addressing challenges in rural communities, you're already competing for this solicitation as Alaska-based. So just give some extra attention to this section as it is an opportunity afforded all applicants at this stage or at this time across our agency competing for funds. Similarly, performance measures is a standard part of our application process for all solicitations. Part of your application is to detail out goals and objectives and deliverables. Just to highlight for you, those goals should be measurable and achievable and written in very concrete and quantitative statements. So guidance we like to give is using the SMART method. SMART standing for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So if you're putting that level of detail into your goals and objectives and that they're quantifiable, then you should be good to go. Performance measures, just as a tip for folks, the performance measures data that is provided in the application is designed to just give you an idea and alert you to the information that you will be required to track if you are a successful applicant and you receive an award, receive funding under this award. So you are not required to submit performance data as a part of the application, but be aware that you will be required to track data upon award, and this is just a sample of the data. If you would like, a sample of the data provided in the solicitation. For more detailed information, you can go to OJJDP's website for performance information in general. And yes, here's the URL or the link for that performance information. So if you have any questions about what some of the types of measures are beyond the solicitation and how to track and how you might set up a performance management or performance monitoring system, you can click there to get a better idea. But again, you do not need to have that set up as a part of your application. It's more for your general awareness. Okay, so for those of you who are new to applying to federal funds, I'll call your attention to page 16, which covers what an applicant should do, and then also on page 17 what an application should include. There's a checklist in there, and our best advice is to, when you've completed your application, to make sure you literally go through the checklist and check off each of the things required. Of critical application element, meaning that your application cannot be reviewed unless it includes a program narrative and a budget narrative. Those are critical elements in order to even go into a peer review process. And then beyond that, those other factors that we've been talking about throughout the course of the webinar related to partnerships and specific details and timeline and things like that, and tribal resolutions and MOUs, those things will be assessed through the peer review process and are also critical to your competitiveness that will make for a successful application. But these are called out specifically as considered basically, it's considered an incomplete application without. So these are resources just for your general awareness. There is a Grants 101 on OJP's website that applicants find very helpful, and we'll have some additional guidance and FAQs related to acquiring DUNS numbers and a few other tips. Read the entire solicitation carefully for all application requirements. I'd actually recommend to read it in the entire solicitation more than once or twice because there's a lot of information in there, and it's important in all solicitations, and it's important to make sure to include everything that's asked for. Okay. Similarly, answer each question and follow the order of the review criteria. Pay attention to the percentages that are allocated at the back. That gives you an idea of the weighting of each of the sections, because there are page limits, so that gives you an idea where you need to focus the amount of detail in your written submission. Check off the application checklist, and this is important. Please allow at least 2 days, but I would actually recommend a week before the deadline, before the close date that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, which is just before midnight, March 25th. So I would submit at least a week ahead, because of the volume of activity with applications coming in on the close dates. We've had applicants that have had difficulty from a technological standpoint because they waited to the last day, and those things can prevent you from being able to submit. So we ask everybody to pace ahead of the deadline for your sake. And then lastly, there's some useful links related to, again, the program announcement solicitation. There's a frequently asked questions page and our grant application resource guide that all will be helpful in taking you step by step through your application submission. So with that, I will end there. We have reposted the Response Center phone number and email. That is where questions about this solicitation should go. Following this webinar, we will have, I think, a few minutes after I turn it back to William. We'll have a few minutes to answer any questions that you might have from my slide presentation, where I can clarify a few things. However, in terms of questions and answers, both I and the Response Center for Competitive Fairness must stay within the walls of the solicitation, so we can provide clarifying questions and guidance about the general application process, but we cannot guide and advise or go on specific project details or anything that's outside the solicitation. So we will try to clarify any questions you have today, and then you can follow up with the Response Center for any remaining questions that may come to you after the conclusion of this webinar. So thank you very much for your interest and your time. We understand that applying for federal funding is an involved process, and we know you're doing that because of your commitment to child victims in Alaska. So thank you for that. William, I'll turn it back to you, and then we can open it up for questions.
Okay, sounds good, and thank you very much, Kristen. And so for those who have joined or may have joined a little bit later, just please note that any questions that you have for Kristen, you can go ahead and think about those and type them into the chat box. I want to go really quickly back to the first poll that we had come up, because I did notice that some people came in a little bit later for the webinar, and so if you didn't get a chance to complete this poll or fill out the information here, please go ahead and take just a few minutes to do so, a few seconds, to do so, if you hadn't had a chance to identify on this particular poll your knowledge of the topic, and then also who you're representing today. For the who you're representing today, if it's an other, you can feel free to type that into the chat box as well. I'll give folks just a couple of seconds just to go back to this poll. Also, for those who came in a little bit later on, if you didn't identify already, if you're joining in a group, meaning that it's yourself and one or two or however many additional people, you can take a few seconds to type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today, just so we can get a good count of how many people who made it in for today's webinar. So that being said, we're going to close out with a webinar, really another quick poll question before we go back to the Q&A portion. So the poll question that we have here: how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar to your work? And if you could just please take a couple of seconds to complete this We have several options here, including grant writing, fundraising, improving reporting methods, etc. Take your mouse and you can click next to the bubble, which indicates how you'll plan to apply this information. I'll give folks just a couple of seconds to complete that. And on applying the information that you've learned. And I'll end this poll in about, I'll give you guys maybe another 20 more seconds. Again, just take your mouse and click on the choice that indicates your answer here. All right. Thank you all for participating and providing that information. So really quickly, if you, and let me wait till the presentation loads here. All right. So again, thank you to Krista for a great presentation. And before we go back to the Q&A, if you would like to, if you have any type of specific information that you would like to obtain from OJJDP's INTAC, you can contact us on the information that you see here on this slide. Please don't forget to sign up for our listserv to learn more about any upcoming trainings and webinars that we have. Also, don't forget to like us on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. If you'd like to get in contact with OJJDP, you can contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at the information located on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, you can feel free to go through the TTA 360 portal. The link for that portal is live here. Don't forget that the YouTube page will be active and available for those who are looking to maybe review this particular webinar at a later date. We will have it posted on our YouTube page at a later time. We also have a few upcoming events coming soon. These links are live, and so you can feel free to select these links and they will take you to the registration page to allow for you to register for upcoming webinars that we have. And again, here are additional webinars that we have coming up soon. And you can feel free to register for any of the links that we have here for any of the webinars that we have coming up. So those are my announcements. We'll go back to doing the question and answer. Kristen, I'll turn it back over to you. It looks like we do have at least one question that did come in from the audience.
Sure. Thank you, William. So we have one question related to whether OJJDP is working to support alignment of the performance measures and data reporting, or the alignment of OJJDP's performance measures in alignment with the data reporting that the National Children's Alliance membership and accreditation system uses. And that's an excellent question. That is one I'd like to clarify, in that OJJDP's performance measures are different and distinct from, and so we're aware that they do not align because those performance measures are used for a very different purpose than those performance measures that are tracking or data tracking that are setting standards for accreditation purposes. OJJDP's performance measures data is statutorily, or meaning legislated, for the purpose of assessing OJJDP's performance or the federal government's performance related to the use of the tax dollars in benefiting the victims of child abuse as the legislation requires under the funding stream. So it's really an accountability measure for the federal government. Some of the grantees are often concerned that that is measuring their performance. We do look at that as one indicator of grantee performance amongst many. So it's just one data point. There's a lot that goes on in terms of program implementation. But those measures are intended to track and tell us something very different than the accreditation. So they do not align. There is not an effort in place right now to align them, although we do, pay attention to the data alignment under NCA. And I will say that the performance measures system, we are going through a systematic review process right now, so there may be subsequent changes to performance measures, but there's not an effort right now to align them. So are there any other questions? I see that we posted the link for the map because somebody was having trouble accessing it. So thank you for reposting that. If for any reason you're still not able to see that map, please just go to the National Children's Alliance website. They have maps allocated for each state, and so there's one specifically for Alaska, which is what that link is for. Any other questions? I see folks are still typing, so we'll give you a minute. I see folks are still typing. We'll give you one or two more minutes to type that question in, and you can take that question. And again, if there are questions that come up after this webinar, the Response Center email and phone number is provided. Yes, we are accepting questions about the satellite grant requirements. So if you would like to type any question in about that, we will see what we can do to address it. Okay, let me see if I can follow this question. So the question has to do with payback or penalty and requirement of payback of funds in cases where the development effort of a proposed satellite was not successful and no satellite office is opened. I think that's a question that I am going to refer to the Response Center because I think that involves a more involved question. Applicants should be submitting for proposed projects that you have confidence, obviously, a fair amount of confidence that can be successful. When you do accept awards, unused funds do need to be paid back, so that is definitely something that would need to happen if a project was not completed. So the timeline 60 months, the partnership falls through and you were not able to successfully implement, the project period closes early and those funds are resubmitted. That's more of a post-award question than what I can really fully answer pre-application. I understand the need to ask, but that's why we're requiring, for an application perspective, why we're requiring that the geographic service area that you're working with and the partners involved for that service area that are necessary to be successful, that they come in with you as co-applicants and that we have clear contractual agreements outlined in the application between you and the partners. But yes, unused funds would need to be returned in all cases, no matter what the activity is, and performance is supported. I should say that's a good point, that this is a cooperative agreement, and we are providing a lot of support to the grantees under this cooperative agreement. And you may note in looking at this solicitation that there is other solicitations on the street, if you will, live from OJJDP right now related to tribal child advocacy center expansion in the lower 48, as well as a national training and technical assistance, a national TTA type solicitation specifically for American Indian, Alaska Native TTA providers. So national scope in that it will serve all of the tribes in lower 48 and Alaska to deliver training and technical assistance with specialized skill and expertise in child welfare and child advocacy centers, as well as tribal and Alaska Native expertise in delivering TTA. So we're looking for a TTA provider that can service and provide supports to all of that work, both in the lower 48 and Alaska, to provide support to you. And that would be technical assistance provided to the awardees for free. So it's free to the awardees. We are committed to being successful with you in helping these funds go to support child victims. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, I will refer you to the Response Center. We can provide a more thorough discussion. Have there been any other questions come in?
Additional questions have posted.
I'm sorry, say that again, William.
My apologies. I was just saying it looks like the questions have slowed here a little. So if we'd like to conclude, we may do so.
Okay. Let me just thank everybody again for your commitment and your interest in this solicitation. OJJDP is very excited to be partnering with the successful applicants through the solicitation and the other two that I mentioned to expand the work that child advocacy centers are doing in Indian country. And we thank you for your commitment, and let us know if you have any further questions. Thank you, William.
Yes, and thank you all again for joining. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.